In tech, I think the default is to work on commercial products, but at some point, a lot of people start to wonder whether they could find more meaning or just contribute to something greater than themselves by working in national security or for public service. I want to talk about what that path actually looks like, how someone can know whether they're a good fit. So I guess I'll start by asking you what made you originally want to start working in defense and public service and what keeps you here.
Yeah. So in terms of what originally made me want to work in defense, I started my career out at McKinsey in consulting, not for any reason other than I wanted to do a math PhD. My advisor said, "Hey, you're probably not smart enough to get into one of the top three math programs, so you should consider something else." And some of the smartest people I knew in that math program were actually going to McKinsey. So I ended up at McKinsey. I always had an interest in national security. I'm not totally sure why. I have like family members and grandparents and that served. But when I got to McKinsey, the first couple projects I was working on were like optimizing paper check processing efficiency. That was like, the big project that, I got to work on. And then the second project was like baby lotion pricing in Brazil. And while, both of these are, important for somebody to think about, I didn't particularly enjoy spending like, 40 to 80 hours a week working on those topics. And so I really like pretty immediately when I got to McKinsey, I started pushing really hard to move to the DC office because I heard there was some interesting national security work going on. And that led me to work on, some defense prime projects. Like there's a couple of defense companies that I worked with, but also different parts of the intelligence community. And once I worked with the intelligence community, I got really hooked because what I saw was people that were my age that were, really, really smart that just decided to go on a different path than me. And I really felt like those people needed to be supported. And so that was like kind of the initial foray for me into defense that led me to go to In-Q-Tel. And then I got like more and more hooked. And then, Vannevar kind of came out of my experience in In-Q-Tel a little bit. So that was a little bit like the initial journey for me.
How would you describe the national security mission set as a whole to someone who is skeptical of it?
Yeah. So I think for people that are skeptical, don't even worry about national security. Like take like one step back and think about public service. So in this country, we are a representative democracy, which to me basically means like you get out what you put in. And so I think of every decision that our government makes as something that we are responsible for. The government is just made up of us. Like it's just there's no like we elect people into the government, and then whoever chooses to go work in the government, that is what the government is. And so I think when I talk to people that are skeptical, it's usually some distrust in the government. And my push on that is like, hey, yeah, that's totally fair. You can distrust the government, but it's also incumbent. It's literally your responsibility in a representative democracy to make the government better, or kind of put your own effort into it. Doesn't mean you need to put your whole career into it. That can like look differently for different people, but it's not enough to just say that you don't want to. Like I don't like it, and you should put in the effort. At least that's kind of what I feel. And I think like. When you look at, I'm just going to pick on like Stanford, which, I like, obviously, I'm a fan of Stanford, but like if you look at Stanford and like when I was there in the 2018, 2019 time horizon, taking just like the Stanford engineering class that graduated that year, like I would wager zero of them, I don't know, I was like several hundred people in the CS program, like probably zero of them went to go work for the government. Like in any agency, like maybe one or two in like a national security kind of way, but pretty much like rounds to zero. Same thing for like the MBA folks. Like nobody who hadn't previously worked in government had any interest in going back into government. And the people that were interested wanted to go into sort of political appointee positions, not like the roles where you actually kind of like do, those are important, but not the roles where you're kind of like doing the groundwork of like making the government better. And I think that's in contrast to a country like Singapore, for example, which sends like tons of really smart people into their public service. To people that are skeptical, I think that skepticism is totally fair. It's like very normal. It's like you should question what that's literally the whole point of the of like the democracy in the US is to be able to question kind of what is your government doing. My push would just be, hey, it's also our responsibility. Like it's incumbent upon us to like make that government better. And so I would start there, and then I would kind of foray into national security specifically. But yeah, that's just if we can get like one or two more Stanford undergrads per year, to go into government anywhere, I think that would be incredible. That'd be like a huge win.
I don't know if you know the answer to this. What is it about Singapore, like culturally or structurally, that makes those young people want to go into public service?
Yeah, this is a great question. There's like people that are going to be way smarter on this than me, but there's, I think, different. One very key component is they pay public servants more money. And it's viewed as like a very prestigious job. Whereas like for me coming out of undergrad, like going back to like, I didn't have like a clear path coming out of undergrad. I was just kind of following where the smart people went. And that to me led me to consulting. For them, following where the smart people go leads you to go work for the government. It's just like kind of a different talent pool. Some of that is like compensation related. Some of that is like how the government is oriented, trying to set up so that people that are just joining can have more of an impact than joining as like a GS7 or something like super low level in an agency. Yeah, I mean, Singapore also is like, historically not quite like the same type of democracy as we are. So there's just sort of like a lot of structural differences. But and I'm not saying we should copy Singapore's model, but just that concept of like, wouldn't it be great if people weren't going to go work for McKinsey, but we're actually going to go work for different government agencies. I feel like that's that's a positive thing. We should try to make that happen.
What is it about this moment now that makes you say, like, now is the time to come work in defense? Like, why now?
The time to work in defense has been the last like decade for sure. But I think now is like the most easy, like of all the times, there's like, it's the most accessible because there's the most opportunity. Before, like the reason I started Vannevar with Nini was when I was looking at what to do post InkyTel, I knew I wanted to work in defense and I knew I wanted to be about kind of building new technology because there's like a huge gap between what the incumbents are able to provide versus what's actually needed for national security. The problem was that there were no options. Like the options were like go be employee number like 2000 or something at like a company that's already been around for 20 years. Palantir is the company I'm talking about, which is not, it's not a bad option. Palantir is a good company, but that was like, it was like Palantir, like maybe SpaceX, but SpaceX was not primarily a defense company, is primarily commercial. And then maybe, Anduril was really early at the time. There were not a lot of options 5-6 years ago, but there are a lot of options now. This has been a top problem for a decade, but it's still people haven't solved it. The fundamental problem of like we don't have the right engineering teams or product teams working on defense has been the case for a long time, and it's still the case. And so I think it's remains like an extremely urgent thing. It hasn't changed, but now it's just there's a lot more opportunity for people to go do this, with us or with other companies too.
I guess the second part of that is why now? Why are there more opportunities? Like, what is making defense tech spike in this environment?
I think it's because I think it was 2017, Anduril got started. In 2019, we got started, and I think we were the first couple of like defense-only companies that actually achieved real revenue growth. Prior to, it's like rare in startups for early tech companies to get past 20, even getting past 20 million is super hard, but getting to, like for us, we're around 80 million. Anduril's like around $1 billion in revenue now. That's like very much unheard of for just tech companies overall. And so I think that was a breaking point for investors to be able to see like, okay, there are data points of defense only companies being able to generate revenue. And therefore it's like actually an investable asset class, where as before it was not like when we raised the seed round, nobody, and the Series A, nobody cared about defense, and it was like an uphill battle the whole way. So I think you're seeing more capital come in because turns out that yes, when you have these market dynamics of $400 billion being spent on defense procurement, only going to maybe roughly 10 or so companies, and all of those companies are underperforming. Like literally, you ask like the government, like on particular programs, these companies are underperforming on many of these programs. Those market dynamics are very good for new entrants. If you can come in and do something better, you can start eating that. That's a lot of market share to eat with very little product and technology competition. So I think that's been the biggest change, is people are starting to see, oh, this can actually work, and that therefore more money is coming in, which means more teams are able to operate, more companies are getting created, and that kind of thing.
Obviously, the macro environment, the geopolitical environment has warmed up in the past decade. Not necessarily asking you to predict the future here, but where do you see the mission set of like defense tech companies broadly going over the next decade?
The top priority is going to be China, competition with China. That's a huge problem. China has, like more shipbuilding capacity than us by, possibly orders of magnitude, possibly at parity platforms in some key domains, but produced at like like a maybe 5 or 10x lower price point. And yeah, just China is going to be the most important national security priority. I think for the next 4 years, what we're seeing with the new administration in the White House is you're seeing China up there. You're also seeing like counter narcotics being a top priority. I think that's going to be a problem certainly for the next 4 years, and I think it's like a problem that's worth working on and worth solving. Outside of that, I think things change significantly, but I think for us, it's just, hey, can we just stay laser focused on like competition with China and then sort of invest our additional R&D in other areas as we see fit. But hard for me to say, except for China, I know is going to be on that list for the next 10 years.
So let's say that all really resonates with someone who hears it, with an engineer who is curious about getting into defense tech, but maybe feels like an outsider to the national security mission, just given background, experience, or lack thereof in the space. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is like, so we just had one of our teammates who does not have a defense background, actually just came to us straight out of undergrad, but has been at Vannevar for 3+ years now. She just went on a aircraft carrier deployment, for like 16 days. Not supposed to be that long, but she was embedded. She was the only civilian for like the majority of that deployment, embedded with the operations and intelligence team on that aircraft deployment. If that's exciting to you, then you should work in defense, because that's like what working in defense is all about. It's being able to go forward with the mission users that have the problem and help them make their jobs easier, or like do some damage on a particular mission problem. So I think if it's more about like, hey, what are you excited about than anything else? I think what's really interesting, and I think is like actually a misconception about the military too, is like, especially like enlisted folks, there is no background. Like, it's just people of all backgrounds end up in the military. I think there's like a perception that it is one type of person, and that has not been my experience. It's actually like an extremely diverse set of people. And I think, so there's no like, are you going to fit in with this group or not? And then the other part of it is like, hey, when you're like, forward deployed with people, everybody's on the same team. Doesn't matter, kind of like, if you're stuck on an aircraft carrier with people, like you will sort of like make friends with the people on that aircraft carrier. So I don't know if that kind of thing is interesting for folks. I think that is how you know that you want to work in defense. And for me, it was like contrasting that life with the life of like sitting on my laptop, like, in Excel, working baby lotion prices, for like supermarkets or whatever. Like, those are like very different experiences in terms of like where you feel fulfillment. So it's just more like, hey, what is interesting? Like, how do you want to spend your time?
What do you think people misunderstand about working in defense tech, or the mission as a whole?
I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying around public service. I think like this actually hasn't been the case. It sort of, I think, goes in waves how people feel about this, based on kind of what's happening more in like politics in America. But defense is not like a partisan issue. It's like a non-partisan issue. And like for Vannevar, we have people that are Republican, Democrat, Independent at the company. It's like we're not here to support like specific political parties. We're here to just do what's right by the public servants that we're asking to like, do these like important missions. That's probably the one thing that I think we see ebb and flow a little bit, is kind of, like the partisan, is defense political or not? It's like national security for us is not political. Our job is just like support that, like the national security mission for the United States, regardless of kind of what the more broad macro situation is. And then it kind of goes back to my earlier point of like, hey, if you don't agree or don't believe in something that the government is doing, my personal belief is it's incumbent upon you to like participate and make it better versus choose to, like not participate, which also is like a valid choice sometimes, but that's just more my macro message to people that are skeptical. Is just like, yes, your skepticism is extremely useful. You should apply your talent to change the thing that you are skeptical about.
If someone is choosing or deciding between working at another big successful tech company, maybe on like potentially national security adjacent products, like AR, VR at Apple, for example, or, AI at Meta, or, any other company that's doing that. What are the trade-offs between working at a company like that on a project like that versus working at a company like Vannevar?
Yeah, I think it really is just like ownership of like how much of an impact are you going to have, and like what are you going to own? I think for us, for example, we built like our first hardware product is like an RF sensor that we built to try to detect specific signals coming off of ships in certain locations around the world. And that team started with like 2 people, maybe 3 people if you round up. And that like 3-person team built a V0, deployed it overseas on like a literal island to like detect, ships in like 4 months or something. And if you kind of take that and apply it, like the Facebook version of that is, all right, we're going to take like 100 engineers and like there's probably not going to be like clear ownership. Like maybe like your piece of the pie is like some very small segment of the thing you're working on, and it's going to take like a year or 2 years or something. Like it's just like that's kind of, it's more just nothing wrong with working at big tech companies. I think you actually learn a lot from that experience, but it's more just like if you want to build things quickly with small teams where you're actually engaged with the users on a mission problem, don't do that at a bit. You can't do that. It literally, you structurally kind of can't really do that at bigger companies. So yeah, I think startups are the only answer for people that really like 0 to 1 stuff. It's kind of startups are the move.
Would you have the same answer for a big tech company like we're talking about versus a defense prime? Because at least in a defense prime, you're working directly on that problem.
Yeah. So I think the problem with defense primes, and there's actually some really smart people that work at the primes. I've worked with some of them before. The challenge with defense primes is more structural than anything else. You have these organizations that have often been around for like 80 years, like not exaggerating, like maybe about 80 years old. And their decision-making process and how they operate has been completely shaped by the government's procurement process. And so the people that are usually like the smartest people at defense primes, like they're A players, they put on like sales and program requirements and program shaping and capture, which is like a very like, useful function, but it's not like building the thing. It's not like building the product or doing the engineering. And there's the reasons why they do that are kind of like business incentive reasons. It's because like they make their money off of winning these very large, oftentimes cost plus programs that take 3 years to shape and win with program managers. And so that's how their entire organization is aligned. It's not aligned to build new things. And so if you try to go into a defense prime and build something new, even though the leadership might be very smart and completely well-intentioned, that thing is probably going to get like, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle for no reason basically the entire time until the project suffocates. So I think there's like some probably counterexamples that you could use, but not very many. And that's why companies like us and Anduril and others are able to come in and eat like large parts of the market that we should not be able to go in and eat. But the only reason we're able to do it is because of just complacency and like the structural like setups that prevent these big companies from actually making product bets and like on tech areas that are new for them. So a lot of things that are good about the primes. I think you can learn a ton, like especially on the BD side. There are some things that you can kind of learn at a defense prime that may be useful at a smaller company. Sales cycle is still very different, but that would be a hard one. Like between like a Google and a Boeing or something, I think would be very manager dependent on how to make that choice. Like if you knew the manager at the defense prime and knew they were really good, then maybe that's a better path, but that would be a hard call.
But if you like going from 0 to 1, work at a startup.
Yeah, yeah, probably. Again, I don't mean to like knock the defense primes, but there's a reason. There's a reason we exist, and there's a reason we've been able to be successful, and that's like largely due to the defense primes in my mind, like not keeping at pace with what they've needed to keep pace with.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the mission of Vannevar to deter conflict with China. I want to ask you about deterrence and why that distinction is important to you.
Yeah, at least for the China fight, there are a lot of people that focus on kinetic deterrence, and actually the majority of the government thinks about it in this way, which is how do we build like more capable fighter jets or more bigger aircraft carriers, these sorts of things that are really expensive and oftentimes geared towards fighting the last war, and oftentimes are meant to be kinetic, like have a kinetic end effect in nature, meaning we're going to go destroy all of the PLA Navy ships, which is like very important. We need to be able to do that. That's like an important mission. I think the better focus is like not needing to use those assets. I think it's better to not have to go to war in that way. And certainly kind of, being able to demonstrate capability overmatch of, hey, our fighters are just so much more sophisticated than yours that you can't win a fight is part of that. But there's a lot of competition that happens not in the kinetic realm, not really related to like, is our fighter more capable or not, that definitely shapes like the odds of us going to war. And so when we focus on China, we focus a lot on the competition domain and things like economic warfare, access and basing, like where do we have assets in like airfields and fuel supply depots, and where does the CCP have access to those, and how do we kind of shape the terrain so that, it's advantageous to us and not to them is really important.
What's that saying? It's like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
I like that.
I did not come up with that.
That's yeah.
Okay, last question, kind of in this line of thought. Let's say an engineer or someone is coming to Vannevar or some other defense tech startup from their big tech job or just from general commercial tech industry. What do you think would be like the biggest surprise that they would encounter?
Probably a lot of surprise. I guess a lot of surprises. I think the main one is just like being able to go on a military base and like talk to people and like watch people doing some important intelligence function or some important operations function is like kind of crazy for a lot of people that haven't experienced that before. The other shock is going to be size. So again, like in support. So Facebook is really big, which means it's slower to get things done, but it's also has like a lot of really useful support functions. Like if you're an engineer, maybe you don't have to worry about like infrastructure, DevOps, like nearly as much as you would at a startup. So I think being comfortable with, hey, like when we say there's like a 3-person engineering team that's building an RF sensor, like we literally mean that. There's like like that means like the engineers are also like assembling the RF kit in our New York office. There's like, right now we had to build a bunch of kits. So there's like parts of kits like scattered across the office because the team was coming in to assemble these things before going overseas. Like that's also part of the job. It's like, so you have a more ownership, more freedom and flexibility to do what you want. You also have way less support. And so it's like, yeah, that can be good or bad, just depending on kind of the type of person.